Welcome to CISO Chair, where true cyber leadership, real stories, and industry insights take center stage. This is your seat at the table.
Did you know that despite strict GDPR regulations, 40% of scientific research projects still struggle with proper data anonymization and privacy compliance? This gap poses a serious risk not only to participant confidentiality, but also to the integrity of research itself. Welcome to CISO Share Podcast, where we spotlight the leaders shaping the future of security, privacy, and technology. I'm your host, Ashish, bringing you deep conversations that cut through complexity to reveal real world insights. Today, we dive deep into these challenges and more with Enrico Glerean, a staff scientist at Aalto University, Finland, and a pioneer in secure scientific computing, data protection, and responsible AI. Enrico's work uniquely bridges cutting edge neuroscience research and practical GDPR application, making him a transformative voice in both academia and cybersecurity. So let's start exploring our journey from brain MRI research to becoming a champion for data privacy and open science. Enrico, welcome to CISO Chair.
Thank you so much, Ashish. And buonasera a tutti. As you can guess, I'm from Italy. I'm Enrico. Very happy to be here and very happy to talk about all the topics from the brain to the data protection.
Let's start with what inspired you to take your path of moving from cognitive neuroscience to scientific computing and data privacy. And before actually even jumping into it, can you quickly briefly touch upon for our audience what is it that you do and what are your day-to-day activities pertaining to information security, cybersecurity, privacy, and of course the academia part as well?
Yeah, so basically it started, my background is in neuroscience, specifically neuroimaging, so with techniques like functional magnetic resonance imaging. And from there, kind of the interest, and in the end, how can I say, the necessity of getting into data protection came from the so-called reproducibility crisis. So in especially psychology, but also neuroscience, and in the end, in many other fields of science, something about maybe 15 years ago, there was this reproducibility crisis where there was a big kind of revisiting of what was published. One estimate is that about 50% of the biomedical articles published are not reproducible, which basically means that given the same data and similar methods, we are not able anymore to get the kind of same, how can I say, statistically significant results that the original paper was getting. And of course, one of the biggest issues with the reproducibility crisis is so-called data secrecy. If we keep the data secret for whatever reason, we can have good reason for keeping the data secret, but then it's impossible to verify the findings. And then at the end, it's impossible to reproduce the findings. So we can just assume that, even one of my papers, one could say, okay, I was just lucky to have the right study participants doing the right task, but then maybe no one is able to, reproduce that anymore. So then from the reproducibility crisis, I got into the data sharing and specifically personal data sharing, because the type of studies that I do, they require this measuring brain signals from individuals. And so from there, got so much into data privacy that in the end, it became kind of the job that I'm doing today. So as a staff scientist, I tend to help all sorts of scientists at Aalto, and this goes beyond neuroimaging and neuroscience. So in the end, what I do today is that I can basically, whether I help somebody for a simple task, or then we need to do hands-on application of privacy enhancing technology, synthesizing data that was sensitive so that we can reuse the synthetic data for other tasks. And of course, all of this is strongly related to research ethics. And if now I talk a little bit about research ethics, recently with two other co-teachers, we are now the main responsible teachers of the mandatory research ethics course for all the doctoral students at Aalto University. And of course, it's very important as part of the doctoral studies to build the foundations of research ethics and research integrity, and of course, compliance, GDPR, but not just GDPR, there can be all other regulations like dual use or export control and things like that. So this is where we are now.
Thank you so much for that. And maybe again, for the audience, if you could touch upon going to the basics, why is reproducibility essential in both research and security?
Well, the thing is that data secrecy in research study is an issue. Sometimes we must, or we truly need to have data secrecy because, for example, it's impossible to anonymize the data subject. the study participants. And so in that case, we can't, openly share the data that these subjects have given to us. Of course, there are all sorts of so-called data processing agreements that can be put in place. So in the end, there are ways to, overcome data secrecy. But unfortunately, data secrecy sometimes it's just that maybe scientists, they get kind of attached to their data, even though in a way it's not their data. It's data of the scientific community. And then they always feel that by giving access to other persons to their data, they might lose whatever, effectiveness that they reached, or the fact that maybe they want to, squeeze more papers out from that specific data set. Data secrecy has this type of, on one hand, it's ethical to protect the privacy of the data subject, but on the other hand, there might be this type of conflict of interest of the researchers who want to keep their data secret so that they can write more papers, or I don't know, maybe fear of being scooped, this type of, one could even say irrational fears. So then my interest was and has been, and I'm still fighting for, kind of opening as much as possible in my specific field, brain imaging data. The reproducibility crisis was a good thing to happen into science years ago, because then there was a reconsideration on the importance of sharing data and opening data. And I don't know if it was the reproducibility crisis itself, but now we have lots of open data policies at the university level, national, European, and global level. Some specific types of data are considered, how can I call them, high priority or high importance data. And of course, we can understand that when it comes to the biomedical data, there is even this type of so-called public interest. So the fact that these data sets can be useful for the general public. And thanks to these regulations like the European health data spaces, or national, in the case of Finland, we have a secondary law for the reuse of medical data. We can enable basically more sharing of data, maybe not sharing in the sense of, publicly, completely public data that anyone can download, but this type of controlled access sharing. And so you can understand that in the moment that we need to enable controlled access sharing of personal data, then cybersecurity and strong identification comes into play. Many of these European health data space, and also in the case of Finland, the secondary law for reuse of medical data, they actually have in the legislation the requirements of using strong, secure computational environments, so-called trusted research environments. But the idea is that these secure environments, they are kind of, even though you can access them via the internet, but the virtual machine itself is disconnected from the internet. So that there's a higher level of security, basically making it impossible to take malicious software inside or sending the data out. And so, this type of applications are now, especially considering the European health data space is finally a thing that, cybersecurity is extremely important when we are talking about of these medical or personal data sets.
So, okay, so now I'm a little more curious to know with regards to how you go about doing that. And what I'm trying to get to with that is, how does your research insights shape your ethical approach to sensitive data? And how do you go about actually implementing it on ground? It could be your processes,
Yes.
technologies, frameworks, etc.
Yeah, so in the work I do, both with my data that I might be collecting, or when I help, when I join other research projects, the biggest challenge is always to anonymize the data. And usually the conversation that I have with other researchers is that we can immediately forget about anonymization and immediately start calling it pseudonymization. And this difference, especially in the European context, between anonymization and pseudonymization is very subtle but very important, because pseudonymized data is still personal data. Specifically in these research projects, we might need to store, for various reasons, the raw data. So sometimes it's actually impossible to completely destroy the raw data so that we can get, a truly fully anonymous data set. Of course, we don't store the data forever. GDPR, kind of wants us to delete the data if we don't use it anymore. And our practice that after 5 years of that the data has no use, we basically erase the raw data. But because the raw data is always possible, and theoretically, basically even the re-identification of the subject, we always need to be careful when we want to publish the results, or even without publishing, when we want to work with the results. so that, we can get other, let's say, collaborators from other universities or from other research groups to use the data without worrying too much about this type of re-identification or data protection issues. So the biggest challenge is applying privacy enhancing technologies, because every data set is one thing on its own. There is no simple package that I can just say, throw the data, wait, and get the data out. It always requires ad hoc scripting, ad hoc consideration. In the case of magnetic resonance imaging, we collect, in the case of brain imaging, we basically collect a full MRI of the head. And so you can understand that you get the kind of the model of the face of the individual. And so, for example, in this privacy enhancing technology, there is some masking tool that are able to deface the magnetic resonance images of the head, but those tools, sometimes they fail. So sometimes we have a paper about this. So for example, I tested multiple defacing tools, and sometimes the tool might think that the front of the face is actually in the back. So it starts defacing the neck. So, it's lots of kind of quality control and making sure that the tool has really masked the face of each study participant. And it can be very tedious, because sometimes we run studies with 200 participants, and we need to manually check 200 MRIs of the brain. So, this is really privacy enhancing technology in practice, hands-on data security, but it's very important, because then we know that we kind of did the right things to do. We minimize the data as much as we could, but of course we don't go and destroy the important bits that are useful for our studies.
And maybe with that said, if you could touch upon how and in what capacity are these Triton HPC clusters used, and what is the research support that you get from there? And more importantly, how is AI being leveraged for solving these on-ground challenges?
Yes, so thanks for bringing up the high performance computing. So I'm one of the administrators of our university HPC cluster, which of course doesn't always only serves those researchers working with neuroscience, but we have all sorts of simulation on physics, and of course lots of computational scientists training new machine learning models or fine-tuning existing models. There are all sorts of research happening. I think that our winning thing is the team effort. I guess our team now is somewhat around 18 people. And of course, there's the core administrators, but on top of that, we have many research software engineers, which is this type of figure that you can think it like an ad hoc IT or coding software expert that can join a research project. It can join maybe, for doing the whole software for a project, or maybe just helping the, let's say, usually doctoral researcher in their coding needs. And so because of this, it's really nice that we can actually, thanks to the HPC, kind of scale up the processing. So earlier I was giving the example of running a neuroimaging study with 200 subjects. And usually in neuroimaging, you need to basically pre-process the data of each subject. And this is the type of task that can be easily parallelized, because the key thing of HPC cluster is that you can run many things in parallel. And so, if back in the days, you only have a workstation and you need to do the 200 subjects one after the other, and if it takes 1 day per subject, it's 200 days of pre-processing. Now with HPC, we can run them all in parallel, and basically after 1 day, we get all the pre-processing done for 200 subjects. So this is, of course, it's easy to say like this, but learning how to use HPC resources and balancing also, this type of how much you can request, how much you need, it's challenging. And this is where the kind of support of my team comes into play into many projects. Now, when it comes to it, the artificial intelligence, and maybe, of course, artificial intelligence is a broad term. If we narrow it to basically machine learning, which is lots of, at least the type of artificial intelligence that is being studied, or at least that is running on our cluster, well, there I see lots of kind of, needs, not only from the computational side, because in general, this type of machine learning models, they tend to be bigger, and often they require GPU servers to be loaded into memory. And then the bottleneck becomes the so-called VRAM, the memory of the GPU card. Of course, we're trying to get from, NVIDIA and AMD, the latest, biggest servers with as much memory as possible. But then, of course, we have the researchers kind of, fighting for getting access to the GPU servers. On the other hand, I have to mention also that beyond Aalto University in Finland is one of the AI factories of Europe, and we work closely with the Lumi supercomputer. So then when one of our researchers really needs to scale up, we know that we're going to have thousands of GPUs available in the Lumi supercomputer, and I don't remember how many tens of thousands of CPUs. So it's truly possible, to train even from scratch full large language models and things like that.
I wanted to actually also check what are the challenges and maybe lessons for security leaders and CISOs associated with running HPC clusters to support sensitive research workflows and managing secure, reproducible data at scale.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So maybe if we separate it into the managing of high performance computing clusters, it's challenging. And on one hand, I don't know how many companies out there are running their own clusters, but it's obvious that companies like OpenAI, they have this type of data centers with this type of resources. I think that there was a blog post from OpenAI from maybe 22 or something like that, where they were discussing how they trained the GPT-3 model, and they were using 5,000 GPU nodes, so an HPC cluster with 5,000 GPU nodes over Kubernetes, which is one technology to basically control the scaling of this type of parallel processing over a large amount of computing resources. And so what happens in the end is that many companies, they rely on external HPC clusters, which in the end could be Microsoft Azure, AWS, or then in the case of Europe, some of these AI factory, which are HPC clusters that are of course available to researchers, but they're also available to small and medium enterprises, for example. And as soon as you start mentioning, when I teach in research ethics, I need to touch on these computing and security topics. And usually, we talk about cloud computing or cloud storage, but cloud is a fancy name for somebody else's computer. So we can understand that then it goes to the security and the safety of the data. If you are a hospital and you need to ensure the maximal security, but you still want to run whatever machine learning models that you are planning to run with your medical images, well, then it's a moment, do we trust whatever external provider that we send all our data and use their HPC cluster, or do we really need to start thinking that maybe we should build our own? And often the kind of the question or the answer is never easy. And sometimes maybe in some specific cases, they rather have a GPU server in the basement of the hospital that is running, securely, literally physically securely, because there's no way for anyone to enter there. And in some other cases, maybe there can be this type of contracts with whatever external provider. But of course, maybe then privacy enhancing technology can come into play. That maybe in the, let's say, Azure cloud computing servers, you don't have the full identifiable data, but you have this type of de-identified. And then for the second part of your question related to the reproducibility of machine learning, artificial intelligence, this is actually a very hot topic, and we're actually running a workshop on this in a couple of weeks. This workshop will be in person only, but the materials will be public. And then the idea is also that we will run it in our part of our code refinery workshops that we run. It's a very nice way that we basically use Twitch TV to stream the content of the workshop, and then the learners can watch online, do the exercises and things like that. So reproducibility of machine learning is a very difficult topic, something that we see our researchers struggling, because sometimes things can get so big and the training of big AI models can take many, many days. And there are all these practicalities that, you might have that one process dies, even though it's been running for 2 or 3 days. So it's very important to set this type of checkpointings so that you can resume the training where it was. And then, of course, when things are scaling so much, you need to start automating things. So this type of CI/CD automations and scaling of the processes. And again, the more you automate the training process for machine learning, the more there are potential security issues that maybe in a closed environment like our cluster, maybe one doesn't care that much about. But in the moment that you start, using external providers, and you have also this type of difficulties that you need to kind of automate everything kind of, delegate to automation the training of the model, then it gets difficult to, fully have a picture of the whole processes that are going on. And again, if it's very sensitive data, then one needs to add a layer of safety, of monitoring, of this type of processes. So it's a big challenge.
Thank you for sharing that. And again, from your experience, do you see any hesitance in terms of leveraging AI, particularly in a regulated industry like healthcare or maybe for clinical decisions?
Well, I think that if I look at, I'm very familiar, of course, with the research done on AI in healthcare. And this is not a new thing. For many years, there have been many applications and many research papers that have shown strong potentials of the usage of AI system for diagnostic purposes. Of course, when it comes to a diagnosis, it's never fully automated. It's more like, giving a suggestion to an expert. Let's say, for example, a radiologist, that maybe some tissue in the neck could be maybe, cancerous. And then at the end, of course, it's the expert that can actually diagnose and make the decision. The challenge, of course, is that these studies are, again, maybe working with open data or even hospital data, but they have the ability, they're not, how can I say, they're not real world applications. So it's easy for a researcher, or maybe, it's not easy, but of course it's possible for a researcher to get access to an HPC cluster, run their whatever patient data, and get these estimates on the, I don't know, level of chances, probability of having cancer in specific tissues. But then when it comes to real world problem, with, I don't think, or maybe let's say that the opportunity for companies develop medical devices is, can we then click a button in whatever, let's say, radiology program, and after that button is clicked, there's some model that runs the processing of the medical image and then gives some, output. So it's, again, easy to say, click a button, wait, and then you get the full output. But this is what kind of companies are kind of, evaluating. Then will it be a local solution that, as I said earlier, is there a GPU in the basement of the hospital that is waiting for the buttons to be pressed? Or maybe is it that it's, some external company that will run a secure cluster so that hospital can, maybe send a pseudonymized version of the image and then get an answer back. I don't know, but definitely there's lots of opportunities in this.
Now, again, for the audience, open science is a movement to make scientific research, data, code, and publications freely and openly accessible to everyone to increase transparency, collaboration, and reproducibility. And with that said, I want to take a little bit of a pivot to better understand your personal journey and impact as an advocate for women in STEM and inclusive research.
Yeah. So, well, Aalto University, I'm very happy to be at Aalto University because it's an environment that allows, how can I say, to be active in a positive sense within the university community. So specifically when it comes to diversity, equality, and inclusion, the Making Waves project, which was not started by me, it's been running for maybe almost 6 years, if not even 7 years. And the idea is that to have basically conversations related to all sorts of equality, diversity, inclusion issues that specifically researchers might have. In general, whether it's Finland or anywhere else in the world, academia suffers from the societal biases of many years before. And so there is this type of, they call it like a CISO graph, that at the beginning of the studies, maybe you have 50% of men and women, but then the more they advance in their academic career, the more you end up with the usual, white males being head of departments or full professors, and women kind of, drop out, as they call it. They call it the leaky pipeline. And so with the Making Waves, which is a series that I am organizing with the help of others, is that we are trying to raise these issues with the scientific community that we have at Aalto. And so far it's been excellent and very nice discussions. And in the end, this is also what I like in the environment that I work, that we can actually bring change. If there's a clearly a easy action point that we can take from some event, then we can turn it into a policy or or, it doesn't have to be, we don't need to go to the European Parliament and change everything. Even small things that can happen locally already can improve the life quality of the people here. So in this sense, I'm very happy. Maybe it's a bit, how can I say? Maybe it's not strongly connected with data protection and neuroimaging and HPC, but of course it's strongly connected to the ethical side. And this is maybe why I think ethics in the broadest sense, not just research ethics, is kind of the common element with all the things I do. So ethics is the ground-based, the principles, and then based on those ethical principles, we can then talk about, analyzing medical data in an ethical and of course secure and legal way, or talk about, equality and inclusion of all the researchers in our community and so on.
This is, I feel, genuinely a great initiative, making waves, and maybe I'll try to share more details about this particular initiative in the description. But I also want to hear from you on how do you look at opportunities for cross-sectoral collaborations to build ethical leadership pipelines?
So I think that, I wouldn't say that ethics is coming back into the picture thanks to the AI, but this type of AI hype kind of made people think more about ethical issues. And in the end, ethics has always been there. And even this type of, AI didn't really bring anything new. The frameworks that we can use for evaluating, let's say, the ethicality of a technology, they've been existing. But now, because it's clear that there can be risks that are not just simple legal risks, that they become also ethical risks. So then I feel that in the, even in the more, let's say, business sector, commercial sector, there is an interest towards ethics. So of course, I mean, in a typical research study, the researchers need to go through the ethical review. There's an ethics committee, there's an ethics board and things like that. Most likely a company doesn't need to do that. But now with maybe this awareness of the AI hype, and even with the legislation like the AI Act, the Artificial Intelligence Act, which in the end is a regulation with a little bit of ethics inside. And so, then this reflects the company, okay, maybe we should also consider ethics. Because then in the end, on the long kind of term, ethics becomes an advantage if it's part of the product or idea that you are selling, showing that, you are actually building something on strong ethical principle, maybe gives more confidence to your customers. So definitely, in a way, I'm happy that the AI hype brought more discussions about fundamental rights and ethics. It's still the early days. Maybe, I do an exercise in the ethics course where we try to apply the principles of responsible AI to see if these big companies, these big large language models, do they follow any of these principles? And one can basically see that none of those responsible AI principles are currently followed by the major players, which that does not make them illegal. They're actually all legal. What they're doing is completely legal, at least so far. But this is the reflection that then it's important to have on the AI literacy, that maybe, maybe I wouldn't every day drive a petrol car if I have the chance of taking, I don't know, some electric public transportation. So then similarly, maybe, today I'm not going to use the unethical AI model when I know that maybe there's a smaller one that is more ethical, and maybe today I'm happy with the more ethical option. So let's see, how things will evolve in this field.
The exercise or the practice that you mentioned, I'm sure it definitely helps in not making AI ethics just a checkbox compliance exercise. So thank you for that. Now I have a tricky question, with regards to something like GDPR or maybe similar data regulations. Do you ever feel it is stifling innovation in AI in any sense and in medical research more than it is actually protecting?
Yeah, this is a difficult question. So, of course, I would say that I remember the days before the GDPR, and I remember in a way, I wouldn't call it that we were more sloppy, but maybe we were not too worried about the privacy of the individuals. Of course, in general, we are worried about the privacy of individuals. So 10 years ago, there were kind of less concern in sharing around between researchers. I don't know, a list of subjects to invite to the experiment, things like that. So in the end, I feel that the GDPR actually did something really good, not only for research or businesses, but also for the, common citizens like any one of us, that we are all more aware about our privacy, and we are also given a choice if we want our data to be processed or not, or at least be aware that sometimes it must be processed for whatever reason. Now, of course, with all this level of awareness for the subject, it comes that's complexity. But in the end, it's a necessary complexity. I don't think that the businesses or even the academic researchers should complain because they've been doing things wrong for many years, and now that we have a chance to do them right, it's not a blocker. It's actually, it should have always been like this. So, maybe it might still be challenging, but on the other hand, this type of GDPR compatible solutions are more and more available. The choice where the data can be stored or processed is left to the companies or to the academic institutions. So in the end, I think it was a big win to have something as strict as the GDPR. But on the other hand, I would also like to say that things are evolving. There was a recent I don't remember now if it was a court decision, but basically in some cases what we call pseudonymized data according to GDPR is always personal data. But in a recent decision, it was said that in some cases, if the receiver of the pseudonymized data, if from the point of view of the receiver of pseudonymized data, the data is anonymous, then for their perspective, it can be anonymous data. And personally, I find this a bit worrying to have this type of dual nature of the data, that for somebody's personal data and for some other is anonymous data. Maybe because in research, we treat personal data always as personal data. So even though, if I show you a picture of my finger and you see my fingerprint, you wouldn't know that it's my fingerprint if there's no name attached. But on the other hand, I would never ask you to treat that data as anonymous data because I know that someone somewhere could re-identify the fingerprint. But of course, these are, complex discussions that maybe they would require a podcast on its own on the subtle difference between personal data and anonymous data. So let's see.
In your opinion, can true anonymization ever be achieved given increasing AI powered re identification techniques?
In my opinion, anonymization, or let's put it this way, sometimes the goal of researchers or even companies is to have anonymized data, but that it's still at the individual level, so that I can still have an individual type of entry in my data set that was at least connected to an individual and make that anonymous. But in my opinion, that's a bit of a distorted way of looking at anonymization, even though we know that there are techniques that can anonymize at the individual level. The real anonymization happens when we start aggregating individuals, so that if there's 5 students in a room, maybe I don't need to know the age of each student if I'm trying to calculate whatever average age of people in the campus right now, but I can just do an average in clusters of 5. And the data, of course, starts to be more coarse. It's not the original raw data, but that starts to become truly anonymous because the new data points are not connected to a single individual. They're all averages of 5 individuals. And of course, there can be risks of identification even with those type of techniques. But this is why maybe I really like data synthesis, personal data synthesis. There are, of course, papers out there that they show that even in some cases, for example, when you synthesize medical images, there can still be risks of re-identification, but maybe for more simple data like tabular data or this type of background pseudo quasi identifiers, we see a power of synthesis, that we can generate synthetic data sets from original data and then let companies work with the synthetic data set, train new models from synthetic data sets. So I think that maybe the nice opportunity that AI will bring is the availability to basically generate good synthetic data sets that are reflecting the real life data and make it easier for exploring it and building new products.
Because we were talking about GDPR just a few minutes back, I thought this could be a good opportunity to touch upon your contribution in the European Data Protection Board, particularly on the lines of drafting or writing certain curriculums. So maybe if you could touch upon what have you been doing in that space and how is it helping the bigger community and, of course, the organizations. I think now would be a good time.
Yeah. So the European Data Protection Board, which is the organ of the European Commission that makes sure that the GDPR is applied correctly, they've been running a program called Support Pool of Experts. And the program, I think, has been running for since 2022, I think. I don't remember correctly. We can check later. But the Support Pool of Expert, in the end, it's an open list of available experts in Europe. They can be legal experts and they can be technical experts. I think right now we are talking about something like 500 experts in the support pool of experts. And the way it works is that data protection authorities from a European country, they can request for a consultation from one of the experts of the support pool of experts. And what happened in my case is that I think I registered maybe more than a year ago, maybe 2 years ago as an expert. And I listed the fact that as a person who is teaching privacy enhancing technologies, anonymization, and how to use GDPR in research context, also connected to, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and things like that. I was one of the few in the pool of experts with this type of expertise. And when the Greek Data Protection Authority requested a training curriculum for small and medium enterprises so that they can learn the kind of basics, especially kind of hands-on basics on cybersecurity and training and deploying AI systems that are processing personal data, I was then contacted by the European Data Protection Board to prepare this type of curriculum. Actually, there were two kind of curriculum developed in parallel. The other one is by Dr. Marco Almada. And so Marco has worked on the more kind of the training curriculum for legal experts, for DPOs and people like that. Instead, my training curriculum was more for kind of cybersecurity experts and technical experts in different companies. Of course, in this both curriculum that have been published basically at the beginning of the year, they are both, they are covering the fundamentals. So we can't really go too deep into, I don't know, you wouldn't find a code example on how to, I don't know, apply some privacy enhanced technology technique. But the good thing that we did with these two books is that we decided to make them open access. And so both books are available in the GitLab repository of the European Data Protection Board. And we are now setting them up in a way that it will be easy for legal experts or technical experts to, for example, apply or ask for some changes, add maybe some new references that came out, or maybe even add completely new chapters. If someone wants to write, to expand the book with a new chapter, this is something that is totally available. We're basically taking this type of open source software way of working, but with the training materials. This is something that we have used a lot in our training materials. For example, when we teach Python or Git version control to our students, this is how we work with open training materials developed using Git. And so I was very happy that the European Data Protection Board liked my suggestion of making the books open access and making them possible that everyone can, modify them, improve them, and make them useful. Because at the end of the day, we want people, to find these books useful. We didn't write them just for ourselves, So hopefully it's open source learning materials on AI and cybersecurity and data protection are useful. And maybe this is also an advertisement. Please join the GitLab project and start finding errors or submit new chapters and new sections.
So thank you so much and congratulations on that. I think that's a great initiative. And this is something that can go really far. Because you were mentioning about Python and book, I thought as we step into the final rapid fire section of this particular podcast, I thought maybe
so many. Maybe I can
of
mention
one
a recent
must-read
one,
book or
which is
tool or
the
community resource
AI
that you think
Hype
has shaped your
by
thinking
Professor Bend and Professor
and
Hanna.
something that could also inspire our listeners.
It's a nice book that really gives a good perspective on this AI hype. And what I try to teach to my students to always resist the AI hype. It's just a tool. It's very, of course, it's great that we have this type of tools today. We can learn how to use them responsibly, but resisting the AI hype is maybe. And of course, this can be about any technology. It's always good to resist hypes. Never, dive yourself into any hype, or at least this is my approach. And let's see if it will pay back. Well, maybe if I again
Thank you
stress
for
the
that.
importance of
And in your
ethics.
opinion, again, can you touch
Maybe
upon one
going
skill
back
or
to
mindset
ethics,
critical for future leaders across
where
data science, ethics,
there
and
are different
security, or
frameworks
even
for
technology in
looking at
general?
the ethicality of a technology or of a business, and maybe the leadership in whatever sector they're working at, they could reconsider which elements are ethical and maybe which elements that they are working on, or processes or whatever, they could be made more ethical. And the difficulty, of course, to justify this is that often, or if not, I mean, ethics is not law, and ethical doesn't mean legal. And of course, the companies, they want to be legal and they do all that is required to be legal. But then sometimes being ethical is something extra. It's something that the law is not asking you, but it's a decision that, maybe a CEO or I don't know, some other leadership members should actually say, okay, we should maybe be more ethical, even though nobody's forcing us to do that. Again, I believe that in the long run, it will always pay back, and the most ethical companies will hopefully, be those successors. But I understand, on the other hand, that it can be also discouraging, because even companies like Google, they used to have, was it, I think, the quote, do no evil in their mission, and then they removed it. So even though that type of sentence, which is very close to the do no harm kind of ethical principle of non-maleficence, but they decided to remove it. So I don't think this is the message that a big company should give. I would like to see more companies adding do no harm and actively do good in their mission statement.
Thank you for that again. And on
Well,
a
of course,
closing note, maybe if
if I
you could
think if we
quickly
still keep on the
touch
topics
upon
of AI
a
and large
surprising
language
ethical
models, one
dilemma
ethical
that
dilemma
has
that the
grappled
researchers
you
are
in
struggling is that
recent
should I use these
past or
tools
in recent
for
times, if any?
research purposes, for writing my paper? And the ethical dilemma there is maybe, again, not a legal one, because legally the journals are, as long as you disclose that you used artificial intelligence for writing your paper, it's okay. In the policies of the journals, they are not banning completely artificial intelligence. But then the ethical dilemma for the researcher, it becomes more like a personal dilemma, that do I want to, give my text, my word, my kind of ideas into a machine that washes them out and changes the order? So I see kind of both. I see that some researchers clearly went in one way. They think that it's actually very good to, filter their text to this, whatever, big spell checks and grammar and whatever, rewriting large sections of their paper. But I also see the opposite, that some other researchers are feeling like, almost like, I want to go back to pen and paper and, write, that it's my writing, that it's me. One researcher that I work with, they said, I like my brain more than a large language model. And so I think it's important that people will never lose the beauty of and the joy of writing, and not delegating that joy to a large language model. Of course, if I'm writing the documentation for a software package, maybe that's so boring. I will give it to the large language model. But if I'm writing a blog post or the introduction of an article or a book, maybe the joy of writing, and the struggle of writing should still be as human as possible.
Thank you so much, Enrico, for this candid conversation and for throwing light on lesser discussed aspects of security. And what I mean by that is, more than often, I speak with most of the guests are from the enterprise business side, but you bringing in the academic optic and the challenges and the lessons for security leaders definitely helps the community. So
Sure.
thank you
I
so much
mean,
for that.
my surname is so
Is there
rare that
any
I'm
way
basically
someone can
Enrico
connect
Glerean
with
on the
you, or
planet.
what is your
So
online presence, and how
whatever
can someone
platform you
reach out
find
to you
me,
if
LinkedIn,
somebody wants to know more or learn more about what you're doing today?
my university email address is public. So just reach out, and I'm very happy to connect and talk with other experts. Maybe
Thank you so
the
much, Nico, once again for
for
that. Any closing thoughts
I don't know
as we
what I
wrap up
sometimes tell
our
to
today's conversation?
my students, that the privacy enhancing technology, they start with your data. So not only be aware of these things, but start also practicing them. And it can be anything. It can be, do not use that open Wi-Fi, even though you really wanna check your whatever messages and you don't have, and you really need the Wi-Fi. So this type of, basic things that every day we can add to protect our privacy. If this becomes more common, everyone does them more, I would think that we would see less data breaches and less whatever bad news stories about privacy issues. So let's start small, and each of us.
Thank you for that quick word of motivation, and thank you for all your insights to make this
Thank you.
session
Ciao, ciao.
with a lot of tangible takeaways and learnings for both the audience and personally myself as well. I do appreciate you taking out time, and thank you once again.
Thanks for joining CISO Chair. Subscribe for global perspectives and bold conversations on cybersecurity. Stay secure, stay inspired. See you in the next episode.